Karen stood at the edge of her neatly trimmed lawn, hands on her hips, staring at the wide-open pasture that stretched beyond her picket fence. The rancher's land rolled out for acres, a patchwork of tall grass and sunlit earth, dotted with a handful of bulls that moved slowly like shadows in the late afternoon. To Karen, it looked wild and unruly, too far outside the vision she had for her neighborhood. She preferred things in neat boxes, lawns edged like picture frames, hedges clipped to perfection, and rules followed without question. She frowned as one of the bulls lifted its head, snorted, and turned toward her direction. Its horns were wide, impressive, almost regal, and for a brief second, Karen took a step back. But pride made her straighten her shoulders. "Ridiculous," she muttered under her breath. "They don't belong here, not in a place like this." Inside her house, a binder sat on the dining table, stuffed with association papers, meeting notes, and rules highlighted in bright yellow. Karen liked to believe she was the backbone of the neighborhood, the one who noticed when grass grew too tall or a garage door stayed open too long. She wasn't technically in charge, but in her mind, she was the guardian of order. And now, the rancher's bulls had caught her eye. That evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the sky in shades of orange, Karen sat at her kitchen window, notebook in hand. She scribbled complaints in sharp strokes of her pen. Animals too close to property line. Unkept pasture lowering value. Possible danger to children. The more she wrote, the more convinced she became that action was necessary. She could already picture herself at the next meeting, standing tall and presenting her case, while the others nodded in agreement. Across the fence, the rancher moved quietly among his animals, checking the water troughs, pausing to pat one of the bulls on the shoulder. He worked without hurry, as though he had all the time in the world. To Karen, this calm confidence only fueled her irritation. He acted as though nothing could touch him, as though rules didn't apply on his side of the land. Karen pulled out her phone and snapped a picture, then another. The bulls grazing, the fence line, the way they clustered near her side. Evidence, she told herself. Proof that she was right. She didn't notice how in the fading light the animals looked less like intruders and more like guardians of something old and important. To her, they were simply a problem waiting to be solved. Later, that night, Karen rehearsed what she would say. She stood in front of her mirror, speaking in firm, decisive tones. "These bulls are not safe. They are a liability. They don't belong in a neighborhood like ours." She adjusted her stance, practiced her pause, even perfected the way she would fold her arms for effect. The rancher, meanwhile, sat on his porch with a mug of coffee, listening to the low, steady breathing of his herd. He had noticed Karen's staring, her photographs, the way she lingered near the fence with suspicion written across her face. Still, he wasn't worried. His bulls weren't just cattle. They carried a history, a lineage recognized and respected, far beyond these acres. He trusted that truth, and he trusted the law. But Karen didn't see truth or history. She saw an opening for control, another chance to prove her authority. By the time she turned off her lights and climbed into bed, her plan was already forming. She would not let the rancher's bulls stand in the way of her perfect vision. Tomorrow, she promised herself, she would make her complaint official. And so, under a quiet night sky, the stage was set, one neighbor sharpening her resolve and another calmly waiting, certain that the land and its heritage would speak for itself when the time came. The next morning, Karen wasted no time. Dressed in her crisp blouse and carrying her ever-present binder, she marched down the gravel path that led to the rancher's porch. Each step kicked up dust, but she hardly noticed. Her eyes were fixed, her jaw tight, and she rehearsed her lines silently as she walked. The rancher, already awake, sat on the porch with his boots crossed at the ankle and a steaming mug of coffee in his hand. He had the look of someone who belonged to the land, with weathered skin and a steady gaze that seemed to measure the horizon as easily as it measured people. When he saw Karen approaching, he didn't frown, didn't stiffen. He simply set his mug down and waited. "Good morning," he said, his voice calm and unhurried. Karen stopped at the bottom step of the porch, holding her binder like a shield. "We need to talk about your bulls," she began. "They're too close to my property. It's not safe, and frankly, it's not appropriate for a place like this." The rancher tilted his head slightly as if weighing her words. "They've been here a long time," he replied. "They're not a danger to anyone. They keep to themselves." Karen snapped her binder open, flipping to a page filled with notes she had written the night before. "This isn't about what you think they do. It's about perception. People don't move here to see bulls outside their windows. They move here for peace and order. I've already had a few concerned comments." The rancher studied her carefully. His expression didn't change, but his eyes carried a quiet strength. "You should know," he said slowly, "these bulls aren't ordinary cattle. They're part of a heritage breed, protected, recognized. They've got more paperwork than most houses around here." Karen blinked, caught off guard for a moment, then recovered. "Protected?" she repeated, her tone sharp with disbelief. He nodded. "Yes. The line goes back generations. The government recognizes them. That means they can't just be treated like any other livestock. They represent history, something rare." Karen shifted uncomfortably, her fingers tightening around the binder. "That may sound impressive, but heritage or not, they don't belong so close to my fence. People expect standards here, and I intend to keep them." The rancher leaned forward, resting his forearms on his knees. His voice stayed even, almost gentle, but there was weight in his words. "I understand you like rules. I understand you care about appearances. But some things go deeper than appearances. These bulls are more than animals to me and more than animals to the land. They're a responsibility, and I'll stand by that responsibility." Karen's mouth tightened into a thin line. She wasn't used to hearing no, and she didn't like the calm way he said it, as though her binder, her notes, her whole argument had already lost before it began. "You'll regret brushing this off," she said at last. "I'm not the only one who feels this way. The bulls are a problem, and I won't stop until it's solved." The rancher picked up his coffee again, his steady hands showing not the slightest tremor. "That's your choice," he replied. "But remember, the law is on their side. I don't say that as a threat, just a fact." Karen turned on her heel and walked back toward her house, her mind racing. His calmness felt like a wall she couldn't climb, a dismissal she couldn't ignore. She hated the way he had looked. At her, kind, patient but unshaken. By the time she reached her porch, her binder tucked under her arm once more, her determination had hardened. If the rancher thought a few words about heritage were enough to stop her, he was mistaken. She would find another way, a stronger way, to make her point. Behind her, the rancher watched the bulls shift in the pasture, their powerful bodies, moving with a quiet rhythm. He knew Karen wasn't finished. He also knew she didn't understand what she was stepping into. But he wasn't worried. The truth had a way of standing firm, just like the animals in his field. The community hall buzzed with casual chatter as neighbors gathered for the monthly meeting. Folding chairs scraped against the polished floor, and the smell of brewed coffee drifted from a table near the door. Most people came for routine updates, budget, notes, landscaping schedules, and the occasional reminder about trash bins left too long at the curb. But Karen had other plans. She sat near the front, her binder open on her lap, pages marked with sticky notes in bright colors. She tapped her pen against the cover, scanning the room for potential allies. She spotted Mrs. Whitfield, who always complained about noisy dogs. She saw the Johnsons, who worried about property values. They, Karen thought, would be easy to convince. When the meeting began, the chairperson droned on about maintenance costs, sprinklers, and a minor delay with repainting the entry gate. Karen barely listened. Her thoughts swirled around the pasture, the bulls, and the rancher's infuriating calmness. She couldn't stand how he had dismissed her concerns, how he had spoken of heritage like it excused everything. As the chairperson asked for new business, Karen rose smoothly to her feet. "I have something important to bring up," she announced, her voice clear and sharp. Conversations around the room hushed, and all eyes turned to her. She held up her binder like evidence. "Many of you may not realize this, but we have a situation developing on the edge of our neighborhood. A herd of bulls has been allowed to graze dangerously close to residential property. They're large, unpredictable, and frankly a risk to the peace and order we all value." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Some exchanged puzzled glances, while others leaned in with interest. Karen felt the energy shift toward her, and she pressed on. "I've personally witnessed them near the fence line," she continued. "They lower the appearance of our area and pose a potential hazard. Imagine if a child wandered too close. Imagine the damage one of those animals could cause." Mrs. Whitfield pursed her lips, clearly intrigued. The Johnsons exchanged a quiet whisper. Encouraged, Karen flipped to a photo she had printed, the one of the bulls grazing near her fence, and held it up for everyone to see. "This is what I'm talking about. Does this look safe? Does this look like something we want defining our neighborhood?" The room fell into uneasy silence. A few nodded. Others frowned but didn't speak. From the back row, someone finally cleared his throat. It was Mr. Daniels, a soft-spoken man who had lived nearby for decades. "Karen," he said slowly, "those bulls belong to the rancher. He's been here longer than most of us. Far as I know, they've never caused any trouble." Karen turned her sharp gaze on him. "That may be true today, but can you guarantee it tomorrow? Can you guarantee nothing will happen? We all know it only takes one incident." A couple of heads nodded at that, though not with full conviction. The chairperson shifted uncomfortably, but allowed Karen to continue. She saw the hesitation, the uncertainty, and she pressed harder. "We all worked hard to live here," she declared. "We deserve safety. We deserve order. And if someone refuses to cooperate with what's best for all of us, then it's up to us to step in." The words hung heavy in the room. Some neighbors avoided her eyes, not wanting to be dragged into the tension. Others whispered quietly to their spouses, testing the idea aloud in hushed tones. Karen sat down at last, satisfied she had planted the seed. She didn't need full agreement yet. All she needed was doubt. Doubt could grow faster than grass in spring, and once it took root, she knew she could shape it to her will. As the meeting moved on, the chairperson stumbling through the next topic, Karen allowed herself a small, satisfied smile. She imagined the bulls again, standing stubbornly in the pasture, and pictured how different things would look once her campaign gained momentum. What she didn't notice was Mr. Daniels shaking. His head, or the quiet exchange between a few longtime residents who knew the rancher well. Not everyone was ready to follow Karen's whispers, and some had already decided they would stand in her way. But Karen, too caught up in her vision of control, mistook silence for agreement. She closed her binder with a firm snap, convinced. The battle was already half won. Karen's binder sat open on her dining table, papers spread out in neat piles as if she were preparing for trial. The glow of a desk lamp cast long shadows across the pages, highlighting notes she had scribbled in her determined handwriting. Dangerous animals, lowering value, possible liability. But beneath the neat organization lay frustration. The meeting had not gone as she had hoped. Some neighbors nodded, yes, but too many had stayed quiet. Too many looked uncertain. Karen wanted action, not hesitation. And she knew waiting for votes, rules, or committees would only waste time. She tapped her pen against the table, then set it down with a sharp click. "If no one else will step up," she whispered to herself, "I'll do it." That night, Karen sat at her computer, scrolling through forums and classified ads. She searched for local hunters, men who prided themselves on handling problems quickly. Her eyes lit up when she found a group advertising themselves as experienced, efficient, and discreet. The photos of them with trophies, deer, wild, hogs, even the occasional coyote, gave her confidence. They looked tough, capable, the kind of people who wouldn't hesitate. She drafted an email carefully, painting the bulls as a threat to her neighborhood. She never mentioned heritage or protection. Instead, she used words like aggressive, loose, and danger. She described them as if they were invaders waiting to strike. Then, with a single click, she sent it. The next day, her phone buzzed. A gravelly voice introduced himself as Mike, the leader of the hunting group. "Heard you've got some trouble," he said. "We can help." Karen's pulse quickened. She met them later that week in the parking lot of a diner off the highway. The hunters arrived in trucks, mud splattered and rumbling. They wore camo jackets and heavy boots, their voices low and confident. Karen stood straighter than usual, trying to project the same authority she used in meetings. "The bulls are right next to my property," she explained. "Huge animals, unpredictable. We can't live like this anymore." Mike leaned against his truck, arms crossed. "Sounds like a job we can handle. You're saying nobody's gonna stop us?" Karen hesitated just a fraction of a second before answering. "The owner doesn't take it seriously. He thinks he's untouchable. But you won't have to worry. If anything, people will thank you." The hunters chuckled among themselves, exchanging looks. Karen mistook their amusement for agreement. She pressed harder, showing them her photos, pointing out the size of the horns, describing her fear in exaggerated detail. "If you take care of this, you'll be doing everyone a favor," she said. Mike finally nodded. "All right, we'll come by at sunrise, quick and clean." Karen felt a thrill rush through her. At last, someone was taking her seriously. At last, she would have results. She imagined the pasture cleared, her fence line safe, her neighbors praising her courage. As the trucks rolled away, she stood in the parking lot with a smile tugging at her lips. For the first time since her confrontation with the rancher, she felt in control again. Back at the ranch, the bulls moved slowly under. The wide evening sky, their massive bodies shifting like a living tide. The rancher leaned against the fence, watching them with quiet pride. He sensed a storm brewing. Karen's whispers had carried further than she realized, but he trusted his herd, trusted their strength and the truth of their heritage. Karen, meanwhile, sat at her kitchen window late into the night. Binder closed at last. Tomorrow, she told herself, everything would change. She had taken a bold step, and in her mind, boldness always won. But beyond her fence, the pasture waited patiently, holding secrets Karen had not begun to understand. The first hint of morning crept across the horizon in a soft band of pink and gold. Dew clung to the grass, and the pasture lay quiet except for the low, steady breathing of the bulls. They shifted slowly, heads bowed, horns catching the faint, light like silvered crowns. Down the long gravel road, a distant rumble broke the stillness. The rancher, already awake, lifted his head. He set aside his mug of coffee and walked to the porch rail. The sound grew louder. Engines, heavy tires grinding over stone, the kind of noise that didn't belong on peaceful land at this hour. Within minutes, 2 pickup trucks came into view, dust swirling behind them. Their headlights cut through the early fog, beams slicing across the pasture as they rolled closer. The rancher's jaw tightened. He knew exactly who they were and why they had come. The trucks stopped near the edge of the field. Doors slammed, boots crunched against gravel, and men climbed out, rifles slung casually over their shoulders. They wore camouflage jackets and carried themselves with the swagger of people who thought they had control over the land. Karen stood, Nearby, her arms crossed, her face set with determination. She hadn't slept much, but she didn't care. This was her moment. The hunters would prove her right, and soon everyone would see that she had been the only one brave enough to act. Rancher didn't move at first. He simply stood on the porch, watching them with a calm that unsettled Karen. Finally, he stepped down the stairs, his boots crunching against the gravel as he made his way toward the fence. "Morning," he said evenly, his voice carrying across the quiet space. Mike, the hunter who had spoken with Karen, gave a quick nod. "Morning. We're here to take care of your little problem." The rancher's eyes narrowed, but his tone never rose. "Not my problem," he said. "Yours, maybe." Karen stepped forward quickly. "Don't listen to him. He's been ignoring this issue for too long. You all know why you're here." The hunters exchanged looks, a mix of amusement and confusion at her sharp tone. Mike spit into the dirt, then motioned toward the pasture. "Big animals, all right, but they don't look wild." "They're not wild," the rancher said firmly. "They're protected. Heritage bulls. You set foot in that field with a weapon, and you're walking into more trouble than you can imagine." Karen's laugh was sharp and quick. "Protected? He's bluffing. They're just cattle. You don't need to listen to him." But the bulls, as if sensing the tension, began to stir. Slowly, deliberately, they lifted their heads. Their horns caught the rising sun, glowing pale against the pink sky. One by one they moved, not in panic but in perfect rhythm, forming a loose circle with the younger bulls inside. The ground seemed to hum beneath their weight. The hunters paused, their easy swagger fading. Mike shifted his rifle against his shoulder but didn't raise it. "That's not normal," he muttered. The rancher stepped closer to the fence, his voice calm but carrying a sharp edge now. "They know when they're being threatened. They don't run. They don't scatter. They stand." The men watched as the bulls stamped the earth in unison, their breath rising in clouds of mist. The sight was almost regal, almost ancient, as though something far older than the neighborhood or the hunters themselves moved in that pasture. Karen folded her arms tighter, her lips pressed thin. "What are you waiting for? Do it!" she demanded. But Mike shook his head slowly. "This doesn't feel right. You didn't tell us they were like this." The rancher's gaze held steady. "She didn't tell you a lot of things." For the first time since hatching her plan, Karen felt a flicker of doubt. She looked at the bulls, massive, unmoving, their eyes steady and unafraid, and then at the hunters, who no longer looked eager to step forward. The sun crested the horizon, spilling golden light across the field. The circle of bulls stood firm, a living wall between the outsiders and their land. The rancher rested one hand on the fence post, his expression calm, resolute. "Go on, then," he said quietly. "Step inside. See what happens." The hunters hesitated, caught between Karen's urgency and the quiet weight of the moment. The air felt heavy, the kind of silence that stretched long before something important broke. And for the first time, Karen realized that perhaps she had set more in motion than she could control. The hunters stood at the edge of the field, shifting their weight uneasily. What they saw before them wasn't the chaotic movement of spooked livestock. It was order. It was intention. The bulls had formed a circle, broad shoulders pressed together, horns angled outward like a wall of iron. Inside that living barricade, the younger bulls remained calm, protected. Mike whistled under his breath. "I've been hunting for 30 years, he said, his voice lower now. "And I've never seen cattle do this." The rancher leaned against the fence, arms folded across his chest. His eyes didn't leave the bulls. "That's because you're not looking at just cattle. They've been bred for generations, not just for strength, but for awareness. They know when something's wrong. They know how to stand together." The other hunters glanced at each other. Their rifles, once slung with casual confidence, now hung awkwardly in their hands. None of them raised their weapons. None of them dared step forward. Karen, however, refused to see hesitation as anything more than weakness. She stepped closer, her heels crunching over gravel. "You're letting yourselves get spooked," she snapped. "They're just bulls. Shoot one and the rest will scatter." But the bulls didn't scatter. At that very moment, the largest of them pawed the ground, the sound of his hoof striking earth echoing like a drumbeat. A deep bellow followed, low and resonant, sending a vibration through the morning air. The others answered, not in chaos, but in harmony, as if their voices blended into one. The hunters froze. "That," Mike muttered, "isn't scattering." Karen flinched at the sound, but her pride made her push forward. "Don't just stand. There! Do what you came here to do!" The rancher's voice cut through her sharp words, calm but firm. "Step inside that field and you'll see what they do. They won't attack unless pushed, but they won't run either. You'll regret the first move." The hunters hesitated again. One of them, younger than the rest, shifted nervously. "Mike," he whispered, "maybe we should think this through. This doesn't look right. If these bulls are what he says they are..." "They are," the rancher confirmed without turning. He stepped closer to the fence, his boots pressing into the dirt. "They're protected by law. These animals carry a lineage recognized across the state. Harm them and you're not just dealing with me, you're dealing with something much bigger." The words sank in. The men, seasoned hunters used to quick decisions, suddenly found themselves standing in unfamiliar ground. The rifles in their hands felt heavier. The bulls, unmoving and majestic, seemed less like prey and more like guardians of something ancient. Karen, however, grew restless. Her voice rose, shrill against the calm of the scene. "He's trying to scare you. Can't you see? He's bluffing. They're nothing more than oversized cows, and you're all acting like children." But even as she spoke, another bull stamped the earth, dust rising in small clouds around its hooves. Their horns gleamed in the sunlight, their eyes locked, steady on the intruders. It was not aggression, it was warning, a silent promise that they would not yield. Mike finally lowered his rifle completely, letting it hang at his side. He shook his head. "Lady, you didn't tell us the truth. You said they were dangerous. But what I see is something else. I see animals protecting their own. That's not our fight." Karen's face flushed, a mix of anger and disbelief. "What? Are you saying? You can't back out now. You promised—" "No," Mike interrupted, his voice steady. "We didn't promise anything. We came to look, and now we're looking. And I'm telling you, I'm not crossing that fence." The rancher gave a small nod, as if the choice had always been obvious. The bulls remained silent now, but their circle never broke. Their stance never weakened. For a long moment, the only sounds were the soft rustle of the morning wind and the deep breathing of the herd. Karen stood frozen, her authority slipping through her fingers, while the hunters stood humbled in the face of something they couldn't quite explain. The sun climbed higher, casting long shadows across the pasture. And though no one had moved, it was clear that the balance of power had shifted, not toward Karen's demands, but toward the quiet, immovable strength of the bulls and the man who stood beside them. The standoff at the fence might have stretched on indefinitely if not for the sudden wail of sirens cutting through the morning air. Red and blue lights flashed against the pasture, painting the bulls in strange colors as a sheriff's truck rolled up the road. Dust swirled as the vehicle stopped behind the hunters' pickups. Karen stiffened, her arms crossing tighter. "Finally," she said, relief and triumph mixing in her voice. "Now someone will take this seriously." The rancher, however, didn't flinch. He simply leaned on the fence post, his calmness so steady it made Karen's confidence wobble. 2 officers stepped out, followed by a man in a pressed jacket carrying a clipboard. The officers scanned the scene, Armed hunters, bulls lined like statues, Karen fuming at the edge, and the rancher standing as though he'd expected them all along. "Morning," the sheriff called. His voice was neutral, but his eyes moved carefully across the group. "We had a call about armed men near livestock. Care to explain what's happening here?" Karen stepped forward immediately, waving her arms toward the bulls. "Yes, thank goodness you're here. These men came to deal with the rancher's animals. Finally, someone was willing to listen. These bulls are a menace. They're dangerous. They're a threat to property and safety. You need to remove them right now." The sheriff raised a brow, then turned his gaze toward the rancher. "And what's your side?" The rancher lifted a slim folder from the porch railing. He'd brought it out with his coffee earlier, knowing it might come to this. He walked forward and handed it calmly to the man with the clipboard. "These bulls," he said evenly, "are a recognized heritage breed. They're listed with the state agricultural department. They're protected under conservation laws. Every one of them is registered, documented, and inspected. You'll find the papers are in order." The official in the jacket flipped through the documents, his eyes scanning quickly. He adjusted his glasses, cleared his throat, and looked at the sheriff. "He's right. These animals are fully protected. Removing them, let alone harming them, is a violation of state and federal law." The words landed like stones in the silence. The hunters shifted uneasily, lowering their rifles completely. Mike rubbed the back of his neck, muttering under his breath. Karen's face went pale, but she forced her voice louder. "That can't be true. They're just bulls. Big, messy, dangerous bulls. He's lying. He must be lying." The official closed the folder with a sharp snap. "Ma'am, I've seen these certifications before. They're genuine. If any harm had come to these animals, the penalties would be severe." The sheriff crossed his arms. "So let me get this straight. You invited hunters with rifles to come onto your neighbor's property, to take down animals that are legally protected?" His tone was flat, but the weight of it pressed down like a hammer. Karen's mouth opened and closed. I didn't know," she stammered. "He never said—" The rancher's calm voice interrupted. I told you they were heritage bulls. You didn't want to hear it." The hunters looked at each other, suddenly eager to distance themselves. Mike raised a hand. "Sheriff, we were hired under the impression these were rogue animals. We didn't fire a shot. We'll pack up and leave." The sheriff gave a curt nod. "You'd better. And you're lucky you didn't cross that fence. Otherwise, this would be more than just a misunderstanding." The hunters began retreating. To their trucks, their bravado drained, leaving Karen standing alone. Her binder hung limply at her side, her notes and photographs suddenly meaningless. The official handed the papers back to the rancher. "Everything's in perfect order," he said with respect. "You won't have any trouble from us." The rancher nodded. "Thank you." Karen's voice cracked as she tried one last defense. "I was only trying to protect everyone. I was only doing what was best." The sheriff cut her off. "What you did was reckless. You put people and animals in danger because you didn't bother to listen. That's not protecting anyone." Silence followed, heavy and unkind. Karen felt the eyes of every person there, hunters, officials, even the rancher, pressed against her. For the first time, her authority didn't feel like power. It felt like weight she couldn't carry. The bulls shifted again in the field, the circle slowly breaking as the threat faded. They moved with calm dignity, returning to grazing as though the whole scene had never occurred. The sheriff turned, back to Karen. "I'll be filing a report. You'll want to prepare yourself for the consequences." And just like that, the tables had turned completely. The community hall felt different this time. The usual low buzz of conversation was there, but beneath it lingered a ripple of anticipation, the kind that follows a scandal too large to ignore. Folding chairs filled quickly, neighbors whispering to each other, their eyes flicking toward Karen, who sat stiffly near the front. Her once proud binder was still in her lap, though now its edges were frayed from nervous hands. She tried to look composed, chin lifted, shoulders squared, but the whispers around her stung sharper than she expected. Every word felt like it was about her, because this time, it was. The chairperson called the meeting to order, tapping a wooden gavel, gently against the table. His voice was measured, but his gaze drifted toward Karen almost immediately. "Before we move on to routine updates," he began, "we need to address what happened last week regarding the ranch property." All at once, the room hushed. Even the sound of shuffling papers stopped. The rancher sat near the back, his hat resting on the chair beside him. He didn't fidget, didn't force his presence. He simply waited, the same quiet patience he had shown all along. The chairperson cleared his throat. "It's come to our attention that actions were taken without proper authority. Actions that endangered both people and animals. I think we all know what I'm referring to." His eyes landed squarely on Karen. Karen's face flushed hot, but she spoke quickly, hoping to seize control. "I was only trying to protect us. I saw a problem and no one else would do anything. Those bulls were protected," someone interrupted from the middle row. It was Mr. Daniels, the older neighbor who rarely spoke but always carried weight when he did. His voice was calm, but firm. "They were never a danger. You just didn't listen." A few nods spread through the crowd. Karen's words faltered. The chairperson sighed. "The sheriff's report makes it clear the bulls are legally recognized as a heritage breed. What happened could have resulted in fines, lawsuits, or worse. We're fortunate it didn't go that far." Karen clutched her binder tighter. "I didn't know. I wasn't told." "You were told," another neighbor interjected. "He showed you the papers. You ignored them." Murmurs rose around the room, no longer whispers but open disapproval. The tide had shifted, and Karen felt it pulling against her with no ground left to stand on. The chairperson set his notes down. "We can't have someone acting unilaterally like this, putting the rest of us at risk. Effective immediately. Karen will no longer be representing this association in any capacity." The words struck harder than she had expected. Her binder slipped from her lap, papers spilling across the floor like fallen leaves. She scrambled to gather them, but no one moved to help. At the back, the rancher remained quiet. He hadn't spoken a word, and he didn't need to. The truth had spoken for him. Someone else stood then, a neighbor Karen hardly knew. "Those bulls are remarkable," the woman said. "I took my kids to see them after everything happened. They were in awe. I didn't realize how special they were. Maybe instead of complaining, we should be proud to have them here." A ripple of agreement passed through the room. Talk began of holding a heritage day, of inviting schools to visit, of using the bulls as a living reminder of history preserved. The more they spoke, the brighter the idea became, and Karen sat silently, watching her fears turn into the very thing she had fought against: admiration. When the meeting ended, neighbors gathered in small groups discussing plans and sharing stories. Karen slipped out quietly, binder clutched under her arm, her footsteps quick and clipped. She no longer drew attention, not as a leader, not as a voice of authority, but as someone the room had moved past. The rancher walked out last, pausing by the door to adjust his hat. He glanced toward the pasture visible in the distance, where the bulls moved with steady grace. He smiled faintly, then stepped into the sunlight. The herd was no longer seen as a nuisance, but as a symbol, silent, enduring, and proud. Their circle had held, and in holding, it had turned the tide. And Karen, for all her noise and schemes, was left with nothing but the echo of her own missteps.